So much. I just want to say thank you very much for having me. I'm really privileged to be here. Okay, so I'm going to actually talk a bit about my doctoral research that I've undertaken. I'll touch a little bit about my background, why I undertook the research, and then just talk a little bit about some of my findings. So my research title is TERF, Bigot, Transphobe. We found the witch, burn her. So as you can tell, subtlety is not my strong point, I'm afraid. Okay, the aim of the research was to understand whether the silencing of feminist discourse regarding transgender ideologists' proposed gender reform in legislation and policy capture could impact or has impacted female-only services for victims of male violence. For the research, I spoke to 31 participants in total, 15 of who were pro-self-ID and 16 feminist women who were against gender reform. I combined this with online ethnographic research from the social media platform Twitter. So as you can imagine, a year and a half of looking at this topic on Twitter was an absolute joy. Okay, I have spent over half of my life working in the male violence against women sector. My position on female-only spaces has been something that I grew up with in my career. And on reflection, I took this for granted. I first started working in on the front line of the male violence against women movement in 1995, and I was just 19 years old. I had the advantage of working in services that just a few decades earlier had been hard fought for by my feminist four-sisters. For a short period in my career, I accepted male workers on some one-to-one community projects in the sector, but I have never accepted men in female-only spaces. And I now disagree with them being part of any service provision. My strongly held view is that men have no place in any frontline male violence against women services. Women repeatedly ask for women to support them. And I have used the experience of working with men alongside my research to return to my feminist roots and remind myself of the precious baton that was passed to me by second wave women. During the debate raging around gender reform, I watched as women were being targeted and smeared for their opposition to transgender ideology, alongside the policy creep into institutions without any apparent scrutiny of the impact on women. I was frightened about speaking up because of the threat of loss of funding for the charity that I lead. I attended some grassroots feminist meetings, and I met many other frightened women, as well as many brave, vocal, and tenacious women, some of whom I am now lucky enough to call my friends. In early July of 2018, I did get brave, and I tentatively sent a tweet. It was actually a quote tweet of a woman's place. In that tweet, all I stated was that I supported a discussion around the impact of gender reform on women. My fears were justified, as within 30 minutes of that tweet, I was then subjected to targeted harassment from a lone extreme trans activist over the period of approximately 4 days. Part of their online harassment involved contacting my employers, funders, and the Charities Commission, and I had to contact those organisations and individuals to refute the accusations of transphobia that were levelled against me. It was a particularly sinister experience, and I reached out to some people working in the second-tier umbrella bodies of my sector for support, but to no avail. They remained publicly silent, and I viewed that as further evidence that I was wrong to want to discuss the implications of self-ID. There's no small irony there, because I went away, did 2.5 years worth of research, and now I'm back speaking to all of you on a platform given to me by a woman's place. So I don't know, maybe don't shut up a Pompey girl. It's just a thought. I'm aware that my position and experience is in this debate means the research is personal to me, but the personal is political, right? And there is no escaping the fact that I have never felt so silenced. The reality is that I and other colleagues feel frightened. And this experience of feeling silenced in a movement that is usually so notoriously loud led me to research this topic. I did not want to sit passively whilst witnessing the silencing of women and the fundamental changes approaching female spaces. If I cannot protect spaces for women who have been abused and tortured by men then what would be the point in my career? Above all, I wanted to understand if and how women felt silenced, and I wanted to give them a voice. If I'm honest, I wanted to give myself a voice. I've grown up in a movement that's taught me to defend women and to rise up in unity, even if our voices shake. And I will always fiercely protect a woman's right to speak. Above all, I wanted a discussion about a sensitive topic that I know online to be incredibly polarized, and a topic that my sector has left untouched. Ultimately, I challenged myself to remain open-minded to those on the other side of the debate, and I understood that they would be challenging themselves in doing the same with me. The process overall was incredibly rewarding, and I hope I've contributed and supported the many feminist sisters who feel silenced. Equally, in speaking to participants who disagreed with me and sharing a space for respectful dialogue on differing political issues, I learned a great deal, and I hope that this was as worthwhile to them. By speaking to people on both sides of a heavily contested debate and using the forum of academic research, I wanted to represent a fair balance to opposing viewpoints and provide a catalyst in fostering trust in the process of respectful disagreement. The aim was to initiate a wider discussion in my sector. Victims watch what we as professionals do, and they deserve better than our silence. The issue is not going away, and the sand that we have buried our heads in only goes so deep. When we come up for air, the women that we serve could have lost trust in our ability to model nuanced discussion and to defend their spaces. As so many of us in the movement are survivors ourselves, we would do well to remember that a silent, passive position is not one that reflects back the smashing of patriarchal power and control from those who wish to shut us up. In terms of my findings, they evidence that the sweep of transgender ideology policy capture meant participants involved in the provision of services for female victims understood they risked their funding if they spoke up in objection to trans women in female-only spaces. 99% of participants who worked on the front line in domestic abuse organisations felt that they had been silenced in the past or are still being silenced due to fears relating to the commissioning landscape and losing funding for already cash-stripped services. It's perhaps unsurprising that the male violence against women movement have stayed deafeningly silent on the transgender debate. For example, as Karen's already said, similar to Vancouver City defunding Vancouver rape relief in Canada, the Scottish government changed its funding policy in 2012 and without any consultation, attached a condition that all women's services be trans-inclusive or risk not being funded at all. The move by policymakers to use the preferred terminology of queer theorists around sex and gender, and thus change the definition of the word woman from one based on biology to one based on gender identity, has enforced the ideology of transgenderism. Through the research, self-ID was shown to be already in operation and perceived to be already law. But even the participants I interviewed who were pro-self-ID and who were supportive of gender reform did not agree to a blanket acceptance of trans women in female-only male violence against women spaces. As I said, I interviewed 31 participants in total, and 27 of them, 87%, felt it important to provide and retain female-only male violence against women services. 14 of those women had either worked in or still work within the male violence against women sector, either on the front line supporting victims or as contributors to the wider movement. 6 of those, so just under half, were participants from the pro-self-ID cohort. The claim that male violence against women organisations who are trans-inclusive have no issues with self-ID was not supported by participants or by the online ethnographic data. Of course, not all female victims desire female-only spaces, but that should not mean that the many, many women who do want them are denied that opportunity on the basis that validation of trans women under transgender ideology precedes traumatized women's needs. In offering solutions, 93% of participants felt that transgender victims should be afforded their own specialist safe spaces to support their needs, when they have experienced domestic abuse or sexual violence. The small number of pro-self-ID participants who did not support a third space did so in the context of maintaining the claim that trans women are women, and therefore a trans woman's status should always be validated. Moreover, any female victim or staff member who disagreed with this claim in a male violence against women safe space should be educated and exposed to this viewpoint. The groundswell of public discourse changed over the course of the data collection period, and this is largely down to feminist grassroots campaign groups and many, many brave feminist foot soldiers. From late 2018 to the end of 2020, much shifted in terms of the debate, and in England and Wales, gender reform was obviously dropped. However, there is no guarantee that this reprieve in England and Wales will last, as successive governments could reignite reforms. And aside from this, trans-inclusive policy capture has taken hold, and unpicking it to ensure the safety of women and girls will take fortitude from institutions. In Scotland, the landscape is still unclear, and the Scottish Government have announced that they are committed to gender reform. What does this mean on the front line? What does it mean for women? Well, in stark reality, female victims of male violence are transient in seeking support, and they frequently cross borders to save their own lives. If devolved governments and male violence against women services have differing policies with regards to gender reform, this results in women being subjected to a postcode lottery on their rights and desires to access female space. On a personal level, I hope that any woman who reads my research will know that there are professionals in the services reserved for them that are ready to fight for their spaces until their last breath. I also sincerely hope that transgender victims are enabled and empowered to explore the much needed specialist services they are calling for. My final thoughts go to my colleagues working in the male violence against women sector. I hope my research supports other women to feel able to speak up alongside me, including in respectful disagreement. An open conversation needs to happen. Hushed words and whispered phone calls are far from our usual style, sisters. Let's stamp on the fires intended to burn us and have a chat, shall we? Thank you.